One thing for gearing, and this is interesting because it's something that Blizzard haven't shut the door on. Super from Avaris, who said, hard to articulate, but I think corruptions were probably the closest at the start to a less strict meta. Maybe would be a good place to start. And that's the funny thing about corruptions, because, like, not gonna lie, eventually they were kind of fun. The thing that was bad about them was the acquisition and how unfair that made the game feel, right? Like, you put similar effort into your friend. In my case, I got all the good corruptions, including in a weapon. Nikki in our team, he didn't. He got fucked. So that, like, felt super unfair. But the core idea of juicing up your gear with corruptions was, like, actually kind of fun. And, maybe I'm just interrogating kind of like what I'm thinking, what I thought in the past. If Blizzard said that a form of kiss curse affixes to gear was to be a feature in patch 10.1, and they were to then say, but we have a cosmic flux-like currency, and you can pull these in and out of your gear, so you'll slowly earn them over time, and eventually you'll have enough that you can play around with them. To that, I would say, okay, is that like a bit of a borrowed power system? Yeah, I mean, it is, but it's small enough, controlled enough, a little bit of fun for this tier. Okay. I'd actually be okay with that. It just needs to feel relatively fair, and the rate of acquisition has got to, not set up a whole bunch of, like, checklists and crazy grinding.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's an interesting thing. I think with corruptions, we see some losses in the implementation, but we also see some wins in the idea, just now that we kind of think back on it. Yeah. And then, plus, it was self-contained. Sure. Unlike the likes of Covenants. I mean, Domination Shards, what a piece of shit that was, but at least it was self-contained.
Yeah, at least it disappeared.
Yeah, they can throw that experiment in the bin. So it's kind of interesting as we go through all of this. Y1NJ dropped a super saying, what if Blizzard switched, this is kind of interesting, gearing and loot up to make it so that all the endgame gear comes from crafters, but you get the materials from bosses and raids and M+.
Hello, Lost Ark.
Basic starting gear from HC Dungeons. Yeah, it's a bit more Lost Ark-ish. Yeah. See, it's an interesting thing, because I think one part of the design space that Blizzard really wants is that a boss can drop thematic feeling weapons. And that's like a core part of an RPG. I think, that kind of loop, that works in a game like Lost Ark that's so based on, like, honestly, the checklist content. Yeah. Where I feel like if
you're playing the game, not the world there, in a way, yeah.
So I feel like the downside of that is that people would be doing, they'd just be doing the content for the resources. So there's one side of that that's kind of good for the deterministic process, but also the idea, like, the sword that I want is in this dungeon, I'm going to go to that dungeon and get that sword. It's like, if you lose that, I feel like you are definitely losing something. Now, what we do have in the new expansion is basically what you said, but limited to 5 slots.
Yeah.
And I think
it's probably them good. Testing that. I think a mixture is probably going to work, because, like, as pointed out there by Vanilla, it's like, that's Monster Hunter. You get stuff and then make stuff, and that's that makes sense, because you're not going to get a sword off a monster. That doesn't make any sense. So there's maybe a little bit of that would work really thematically really well, because I mean, even like, making sulfurous was such a cool idea. Being able to do that specifically with specific slot items, as long as they're flavorful enough, would be really cool, I think. Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a lot of supers on just progression and gearing, and I think that just shows, like, this is something that the audience is really fucking engaged with. Like the WoW audience in general, because we've been trained to chase this shit.
It's literally the whole point of the game.
Yeah, and we've been, like, sort of litigating and relitigating every single, like, way that they've done gearing in the game's past for years.